very doubtful about this. Welcome, everybody. Let's stand for a minute for the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahasaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of East and West, we bow to you all with the greatest joy and devotion. Divine Mother, guide us and bless us as we make our way home to thee. We are thy children, not your good. Just love us. We love you. Om, peace, amen. Please be seated. So nice to have you all here. We are thrilled to have Asha Swami back with us. It's been a long time. I don't know how many years. It's been a long time since she's been here in Portland. And we're so happy that she made time to come here before she goes flying off someplace else. And she is here from her home base in Palo Alto, but she really is, as she was describing to us yesterday, she's now a wandering sadhu for master because she's traveling hither and yon, sharing these teachings and making friends all over the world and doing what she does so well. And she's going to just share her time with us this evening. But first, we have a couple songs for you. So I'll ask the choir to come up. It's actually a song and then an instrumental piece is what we have. First, the choir is going to sing a song. We're going to sing I Wander With Thee in honor of St. Francis being the wandering sadhu in his tradition. He chose this song in honor of this wandering sadhu. And Tom will put up the words the second time through. We're going to sing through 2 verses, and then we'll invite you to sing with us the second time.
So on the theme of travel, we chose another song. It's from a CD of Swami Kriyananda's composition, Mystic Harp 2. This is called Sailing the Blue Sea. And the CDs 1 and 2 are his Celtic compositions. And number 1 is Ireland, number 2 Scotland. So we can think international, but it's all spirit and all joy.
And sharing these teachings since, I think she said she met Swami in 1969. And she's one of the founding members, one of the pioneers of Ananda, one of the first generations. with us, and she's learned from Swami Kriyananda directly, who learned from Yogananda directly. And she's been sharing these teachings and her experiences with Swami for many decades. And she's very good at it. And we enjoy hearing it and sharing these things with her because it's all about the truth of what is. And that's what we're all looking for here. So thank you again for coming. Those of you online, thank you for joining us there. And let's just enjoy our time with Asha. Thank you, Asha.
I was trying to remember when was the last time I stood here. I only remember how much I enjoyed it. I can't actually remember when. It was many years ago. My mind is still, well, how do you know if it isn't? That's the problem. My memory and my capacities are the same as they've always been, but it's my brain is a little too full. And so things are just sort of falling off the edge. Like, I know that I was here, I remember the whole thing, but I don't know when, because why would I need to know when? What difference does it make? So I have a very open-ended idea of what to share with you all. It was suggested to me that it's a little bit about this book, but this isn't really a book launch. This book has been published since 2019. It's heavy. You cannot read it in bed at night because it's dangerous. And it falls on you. So for many practical reasons, the audiobook is a good choice also. This book is particularly precious to me because, as Lorna mentioned, I met Swamiji in 1969. He was giving a lecture at Stanford University. I was a college dropout from that same university. I actually lasted in college about 2 weeks, but I wasted a whole year of my parents' money before I realized I had been exceedingly eager to understand deep realities, really from my earliest memories. You know, when one is a child, one has deep feelings because consciousness is not defined by the body. When we die, we have our full awareness, and when we reincarnate, we come into a child's body, but our consciousness is not diminished, nor actually is our intelligence, but our capacity to express it is greatly limited. And then there's this kind of confusion about where am I and what languages do I speak and how do I get this food into my mouth and very basic things. But the self isn't really changed. So it's been interesting to me as the years pass and I look back on my childhood and my whole life now, how much the intention has always been the same. And the intention from a very, very young age was basically, what the heck is going on here? And what am I supposed to do? And how am I supposed to be happy? And strangely, and I really, well, when you think about reincarnation, it changes everything. I tended to measure, even from a young age, I tended to measure things in terms of my death. But it wasn't morbid to me. It wasn't like I was afraid to die, but I was always conscious of the fact that the whole thing would end. I didn't even know anybody who had died until I was decades later. But I was conscious of the fact that this was a temporary situation and that the time would come when all of this would not be there anymore. And again, I didn't have words for this. The words came later. But I understood that there would be a point when all I would have was my consciousness. And as I grew older into my teens, it was very interesting because I tended to be able to sort of see a deathbed scene, which again was extremely odd because I didn't know anybody who had died, what to speak of actually being at anybody's deathbed. But over the course of many decades now, I have actually had what I would call the privilege of being there at the end of people's lives. And my recollection of it was quite accurate. Of course, because how many times have we lived and died? This amazing fact that we just do this one, and it looms so large in our mental and emotional sky. But in fact, we've done it over and over. And I knew that no matter what I accumulated, no matter what I succeeded in doing, I was born into a good family, and I was privileged without being wealthy, but I had all opportunities that a person could have. And all doors were open to me because I was school smart. In our society, if you're school smart, which is not the same as actually being smart, but if I was school smart, if you're school smart, you're expected to be able to do anything. So I saw it all in terms of my consciousness at the end. And I was also, I guess you would call it a kind of existential loneliness. I was conscious of the fact that at some point, it would just be me. And that was where I would see this deathbed scene. Weird, isn't it? I mean, at the time, you're a child, it just seems normal to you. But I saw this deathbed scene, with my little shrunken self on the bed, which is pretty much exactly how it goes. And there's people around, and they love you, and you've had a good life together, but just they move away from you. They have to move away from you because you're going on a trip they can't go on. Many of you, or some of you, remember that Paula, who helped start the center here many years ago, and she passed away at a relatively young age. I don't know, she was in her 40s when she passed away. And are you coming at me? Oh, really? Okay. Are we in sound problems? Okay. Thank you for telling me. There's nothing more than depressing to talk for 2 hours and opposite. Okay? We're set? So we were dying, as I recall. Oh yes, I was talking about Paula. Paula had cancer, and she had it 3 times. And the 3rd time it came, she checked herself into the hospital. And then I think she died like a saint. Swami said afterwards, she was liberated. He said, nobody can die as consciously as that unless you're very, very free. So for 3 days, in the end, she was in the hospital, and she just invited all her friends. There were like 25 or 30 of us. Was anybody in this room also there? Yeah, you guys were there too. Yeah, and we just had this big party. And the whole hospital had kind of turned things over to us. We were sleeping in the hall and sleeping in the extra beds all over the place. And we just were pretty much with her day and night. And she had a husband that she loved, and he was close to her almost to the end. But at the very, very end, he sat down and sort of put his arm around her. She turned to him like this and said, don't touch me, I can still feel it. Like that, and then he had to move away from her too. This all came much later, but somehow when I was younger, I could tell that it didn't matter how much people loved me, in the end, it would be my consciousness. And most of what the world gave me, I just could tell that when I reached the end, I wouldn't have what I wanted. And I had this idea when I was quite young that the adults around me who were wise and intelligent and educated and refined people, that they had a secret about the actual nature of life, and that I just wasn't old enough yet. And there would be a point, I was Jewish, So I never did have a bat mitzvah, but maybe it would be like at the time when you had a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, then afterwards everybody would take you into this room and they would all sit around together and they would say, it's been fun and now we'll tell you the secret of life and you'll have all this wisdom and then this dawning realization came to me that they didn't know. That they just didn't know. That they were just taking it as it came and just sort of stacking up one thing after another. And they were guessing. And this was extremely distressing to me. So I got into Stanford University because I talked my way in. In those days you didn't have to be, the firstborn of a crown prince of some country to get into that school, but I got in there, and I went because I thought, this is a great university. They probably know. And the reason I lasted 2 weeks was because they didn't. They were intelligent, they were knowledgeable, they were good people, but they were just sitting around in the dark like everybody else. They had no idea what the real essence of why we were born was. So the Grateful Dead were just forming at that time, and they were forming right there in Palo Alto. And so almost every Friday they would play somewhere. So I was part of the crowd. I never did it after that one year, but we just find out where they were and we'd just go and we'd dance all night. That was my year. My poor parents. I got A's and F's. Because if I did the work, I got a good grade, and then I would just lose interest, and then I would flunk. I think I actually flunked out in the end. I'm not sure. I can't remember now. But it was just, I was desperate. That's actually the only word for it. But we have a Divine Mother who listens to us. And I was quietly desperate because I'm sort of a functional person. And I thought at one time of having a nervous breakdown during that period. I literally stood at a window and thought, I could just lose my mental balance over the existential angst of this. And then I had this picture. This is all past lives, I understand now. I had this picture of somebody just finding me just kind of completely disconnected, and then they would call the medics, and medics would come, and they would take me, and they would take me to the hospital, and they'd put me in the hospital, and then I'd have treatments, and they'd probably give me medication, and then I'd be in there for a while, and then they would decide it was okay, and then they would send me home, and then I'd be standing in front of the window. Just the whole thing. I would be exactly where I was. And I thought, well, that would be a lot of waste of time and money for nothing. And, then into that. First, steps through Ramakrishna. Who wasn't living. He was an avatar from the 1800s in India. His teachings entered my life through books. First time, holding a book in my hand, I opened it and I thought, oh my gosh, somebody knows. Somebody knows why we're here. And much more deeply, what brings happiness and what causes suffering. Every single decision that any one of us makes is always because we think it will reduce suffering and bring happiness. No matter how complex, no matter how convoluted the whole idea is, if you take it right down to the bottom. And some of those decisions are really stupid. Really, really stupid. But they don't seem so at the time. Which is why I often repeat to myself, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Because it always did. Otherwise I wouldn't have done it. But no one had told me until I'm reading about self-realization that there's actual, ways we can understand this. We're not just sitting in the dark. But still I was Ramakrishna died in 1893, and he was a temple priest in the Kali temple in Dakshineshwar in India, which is all very far away from me now we're probably up to 1968. The whole country was blowing apart in all kinds of fascinating ways, but still, it was just too far away. And so I'm still like, what do I do? And then into that reality walks Swami Kriyananda. I mean, who can explain these things? You have to ask also the question, why do I ever worry about anything? Because he has it planned. She, Divine Mother, has it planned. She loves us. She's listening. She has it planned. She takes us where we need to go. In a room probably about this size, except there were bleachers. It was, there was a fraternity at Stanford that was really known for its parties, and they had such great parties that they put up this huge tent in the back of the property, so they could have their parties like more wildly, whatever. And it being, San Francisco Bay Area in 1969, ooh, this will be cool, let's invite a Swami. So they invited Swami into this tent, with these bleachers, and this was very early. Ananda had started by this time, and my friend Suzanne Selby was living up there, and she had told me about Kriyananda. He's a real teacher, and you'll like him. Truer words were never spoken to me in my life, she said. So a few people came down from Ananda Village, but Ananda Village was a little unformed at that point, and a few of the people who came were jazz musicians, whose Swami had, the music that you heard today, let's just say it was a slightly different style. So there were jazz musicians, there was a keyboardist, I think there was a bass player. Nothing that you think of now. They all came to this tent. This is all going on here. I was with people who wanted to be there, but were not so sure, so there were these bleachers on the sides, and we were at the top. They wanted to be in the room with him, but as far away from him as they could be, which actually turned out to be perfect, because I had a perfect view down from the top. And so he comes in, he just walks in. He just walked in. And by the grace of God and past karma, it was the first time I had ever in my life met a human being that I wanted to be like. I mean, there might be a touch of arrogance in my youth, but nonetheless, this is what my mind, he didn't even speak. He just walked into the room. I said, I want what he has. This comes, these things, this is what I mean about, we're so much different than we think we are. I don't even know where it came from. It just came right up like that. And then he spoke. I don't remember anything he said, except after he finished, I thought, oh, he's so intelligent, which I thought, this will be fun, because I like that sort of thing. It's not, it doesn't matter from the point of view of knowing God, but it's my hobby, words and this sort of thing. And this will be fun. And he had a community, he had a way of life. You see, that's what it meant. He had a way of life. He had taken what I was just reading in books, and he had turned it into something you could actually do. And then somehow, and I do not know how, Swamiji started chanting Om in some context. The whole evening was so colored by my inner experiences. Swami started talking the last part of this. I was as far away from him as it was possible to be and still be inside that tent. He started talking, I felt like he was right there. It's like his consciousness just filled that whole space, and he was standing right in front of me, even though we were this great distance apart. Just all of these. And then somehow, he started chanting Om. I have no idea why. And the jazz musicians started going like this. And this chaos just sort of came out in the tent. And people were sort of chanting Om, but the people near us were singing. This is my memory. This is so crazy, I doubt it, but this is my memory. They started singing 99 bottles of beer. I really think it happened. And they were singing that, and the jazz musicians were going, and Swami's trying to, totally crazy. Many years later, far from Swami Kriyananda calling up to the bleachers, oh, you have come, zero, nothing like that. Many years later, we came in a conversation, and I don't know, I guess I never told him. The first time I saw you was in that Vedic tent at Stanford. He looked at me like this and said, you were there? And then he said, that was one of the worst nights of my life. He sort of shrugged a little, and he said, oh, well, something good came out. But none of that. It was just like, imagine, just crazy. But it was sealed for me. He had this community, which was fabulous, and all of those things. He could have been on an ice floe in Antarctica, and I would have just gotten a fur parka and gone up there. It's like, I was that desperate. Quietly, but definitely. It took me a little while. Karma's not so simple sometimes. It was about a year, I think, or a little less. And I showed up. Had an ideology, never, ever, ever, ever look back, not for 1 second. But I also had this feeling, and very quickly I sort of was, well, actually he asked me to work for him as his secretary, I think, within those first few months. So I arrived in June, and I think by the fall I was working with him. And somewhere in that, I think it was the very first year, he said to me, I want you to write a book about me. And let me think how to phrase this. Scared the living daylights out of me is the only way I can say it. I was for many years phobic about writing. Finally, now I've overcome it. But I could talk anywhere about anything, but when I had to write, my brain was turned into oatmeal. I don't know what it was. But so the very idea of writing. However, I knew somehow, I knew what I had in me. When I described my life, I had the good karma to meet Swami early in life. I had the good karma to recognize immediately who he was. Right? I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with him. And I listened to him, and I learned, and I remembered. That's basically it. And then I can remember and offer it back to others. I can just pass it on. And that's all that I do. I just pass it on. That's what Swami gave to me. I try to give it to others. I mean, that's how it works. What you get, you over the channel and you let it come through. So he told me I would have to write that book, and he saw the terror in my eyes, and he said, but not yet. But not yet. And he said, and I will help you. And then every single day, whenever that was, 1971, until probably about 2017, which was the point at which I realized I was actually going to be able to ride it, I worried about it. Every day. It was what I called the mother of all my fears. And I had a lot of fears, and that was the mother of all my fears. But it did help, and it did happen. And so now, just having said all of that, let me now put it where we need to put it. What's going on in this world, I mean in a existential cosmic sense, not in terms of the politicians or the countries or anything like that. The nature of life is always about consciousness. It's not merely about our individual consciousness, it's just that's where things happen from. And we are in a very interesting time. And this is all, all of your friends, you understand, these masters, autobiography of a yogi, you know a great deal about what is happening in the world now. In autobiography of a yogi, it's over here on the right side of the page. Can never quite remember the page number. But this is just like 2 paragraphs. I'm sure many of you in this room have read Autobiography of a Yogi many, many times. I now have. I didn't. When I first read the book, before I met Swami Kriyananda, I didn't get past the Hari Mahashaya materializing in the wheat field on page 9. I was very austere, and just kind of all that devotion and all that miracle stuff didn't sit well with me. The first time I visited Ananda Village, I'll just backtrack because it was so fun. they only had the meditation retreat. The expanding light didn't exist even in dreams at that point, except Swami's. So the little dome, which is still there, is the reception center, and one of the founding members there is Benai, and he was there. He was one of the first ones to winter over in 1968 in Satya. So Benai, everybody was trying to make money in those days. I mean, we had no money, and there was no internet, so you couldn't live way out in the woods like we did and do anything that was related to the rest of society. You had to figure it out. And we had nothing. We felt richer than kings, but in truth we had nothing. So Benai had this clever idea that he would some bass players taking his revenge on me at this point. He would. Is that me? Okay. The mic is supposed to turn on. I can use the standing mic if necessary. He took manzanita branches, which of course were all over the place, and he took wildflowers and he dried them, and then he hollowed out the manzanita resin in there with the wildflowers and made this jewelry, key rings, things like that. It was actually a very nice product. He was very industrious that way. He eventually became a gemologist, but his jewelry started that way. Okay, so there had been also, out in the woods somewhere, there had been an abandoned bread truck, a big van like this, and we lived and used anything that would keep the rain out. So he found this abandoned bread truck somewhere on the property, and he set up his little jewelry shop inside the abandoned bread truck because it was this metal box. Perfect. Luxury living. So he had this, and he was doing his work, and then every so often he'd go somewhere and sell his products like this. So he's talking to Satya, and he says to him, I really felt Mother wanted me to do the jewelry business, so I set up the shop as I felt Mother wanted me to. See, now what happened, while he was away on one of his trips, somebody else decided that the bread truck was an eyesore, and they attached it to a tractor, and they pulled it out, and they pushed it over a cliff. So he comes back, and his entire business is gone. So he's now describing this to Satya about how I thought Mother wanted me to start a jewelry business, so I did exactly what Mother wanted, and then Mother seemed to have changed her mind, and she took it away, and she, threw my shop over the cliff. I'm listening to all of this, and I'm thinking, this guy's pretty old to be just doing what his mother wants him to do. And I'm also thinking, my God, what kind of a mother would do that to her son? So then somehow in all that, I found out that they were talking about Divine Mother, and that did not make it better. That's what I can say. It's just like all of these things were so different in any way that I'd ever thought. I'd been trained to rely on my brain pretty much exclusively. So anyway, there we are with Autobiography of a Yogi, and up here in this part of the book, it says, Jesus and Babaji together have planned the spiritual salvation of this age. They're very concerned. They're very concerned about what's going on here. They're concerned about racial prejudice, about religious bigotry, about the boomerang effects of excessive materialism, about suicidal wars. They're very concerned. But don't worry. They plan the spiritual salvation of the age, which is the gradual awakening, the inward awakening to our shared divinity, which gradually makes all of these darkening ways of relating impossible, because our actual perception changes. It's not that there's rules against it or anything like that, or it's just that our actual perception changes, and it becomes impossible for us to behave that way anymore. And they're working on it. I mean, Yogananda in 1946 publishes this book, and he describes further, because he's already talked about Babaji in the book by now, these two great avatars, one with a body and one without a body. He just says that so casually. Like everybody's going to say, oh yeah, like Babaji lives forever and Jesus is just in the spirit. Right? But that book has been read by millions and millions and millions of people. And it's in all these languages all around the world. And I'm traveling a lot now. And the way I travel is, my name is like this known, but Autobiography of a Yogi is really known. So all of my advertising, look at the book. And because that's not really happening, there aren't that many people walking around promoting Autobiography of a Yogi or offering people the next steps that they can do in relation to all of this. I get to meet the most wonderful people in the world, all over the world, because they have felt that call. They felt this call. It's like, what is the purpose of life and how can I live it? And every one of us is, obviously, everyone, our faces are different. And why is our face different? Because all the vibrations, our chakras are unique. And our chakras just send out these little messages, and then we make something that looks like this. That looks exactly like me. And it'll never look like anyone else. My personal story is my own personal story. But at the same time, it's everybody's story. When I look this Swami, he has what I want, which is he has bliss. And his bliss is based on eternal realities. It's not that he just got lucky in one incarnation. It's a whole different story. And so here we are all. This is what we're doing. And then what Swamiji did, and I wrote this somewhere in the introduction, I said, Swami, this is a job that Swami's had for, at least a couple of incarnations we know. Yogananda was William the Conqueror. Swami Kriyananda was his son Henry. And William conquered, so to speak, that country, started establishing the precursor of the country we live in. This whole reality that the role that England played in the divine evolution of things. We tend to be a little narrow in our thinking. Well, because the English people colonized a lot and were a little bit naughty in a lot of the ways that they behaved, we don't really think about all the other side of it. William started this movement. The way that the British people went all over the world made English the unifying language, because in higher ages there's one language. All these diverse languages, that's a sign of Kali Yuga when we're all separated. So all of this influence, it's all so magnificently interconnected. So Swami was Henry, who was Yogananda's youngest son, and Henry took what Yogananda started and he organized it. He organized the system of laws and everything. He just organized the society because Master came with this huge burst of energy, and then the disciple organized it. When Yogananda was Ferdinand III in Spain and basically fought the Moors and kept Spain for Jesus, really, for the Catholic Church, and prevented the Moorish invasion from going all through Europe, because that was part of what needed to happen at that time. And the same way, Alfonso X, Swami was. And he took what Ferdinand started and he organized it and he created a society out of it. You just want to play the game of the woo-woo game. This is really it. Okay. Alfonso X in Spain, this is Kriyananda, the son of Ferdinand III, who was Yogananda. Kriyananda created, again, a whole system of law, organizing the society like this. And then the Spaniards were very expansive, and so many of the Spaniards came to the New World, which is here, and the Spanish influence was very pervasive in the southwest of the U.S. before it was a country. And so they brought to the southwest of the U.S. Spanish law, which is what Alfonso X had created. Then when the country began to be organized and they began to come together, much of what Alfonso had done was incorporated into the system of law for the United States of America. And there are, and I believe this is exactly accurate, this was so amazing to me, I Googled it, but it's true. I think there are 29 pictures in the House of Representatives of the United States of America of significant figures in the founding of the country, and one of them is Alfonso X. Because Spanish law had such an influence on the founding of this country. Then in 1920, or 1893, Yogananda is born in India and then comes to live in Los Angeles. Like, you know, why do we ever worry about anything? And where do we fit into this story? You know, why are we here? What is our job at this time? And how can we live up to it? Jesus and Babaji planned the spiritual salvation of this age. How can I help? That really becomes the question. How can I help? And what I was saying, let me find the thought just a moment there. Oh yes, I was writing in the introduction to this book. You know, Swami Kriyananda just sat there for, I say sat there because he sat at his desk for so many thousands of hours, and he just thought and prayed, how can I help? How can I help the masters? How can I help Jesus and Babaji bring in this new reality? Oh, people are going to need to know like how to raise their children. They're going to need to know how to have marriages. They're going to need to know how to build houses. They're going to need to know how to make money. They're going to need to know how to be artists. You know, they're going to need peace. They're going to need health. They're going to need affirmations. Just one thing after another. This is what he would do. It's like as soon as he had another moment, he would think, what else can I do? Up to the last breath, almost literally. What else can I do? What else can I do to help Jesus and Babaji make this thing happen? And he organized the whole culture again. And I wrote in the introduction, right now nobody cares, you know, or very few people care, but they will. Because these kinds of movements don't happen from the birth to death of one person like myself. This is just, you know, it rolls like this, and it gains momentum little by little. And you know how it gains momentum? Because individuals like us are beginning to vibrate in an entirely new way. And we're beginning to ask the right questions, take the right actions, and have the right thoughts. And that doesn't mean we have to be dramatic about it or public about it. It's so much more inward and so much more about vibrations. And it's so much more just about having a desire to be in tune with a higher reality. It's coming in as a new yuga, and just come in through these masters, and just come in powerfully through Swami Kriyananda. You know, when I finally figured out how to write that book, which took me quite a while, I wrote 2 books about Swami. I started writing that one in about 2003. I spent about 2 years. It was a period of profound global humiliation for me, which is very good for the soul and very hard on the rest of you, because I sort of dropped out of everything and announced that I was going to write this book, and I spent 2 years trying to write it, at the end of which I had not one usable paragraph, not one. I had been extremely critical of other people's creative efforts, and I had to suffer from all that criticism that I put out into the universe. So I would type a line, and then I would reject it, then I would type a line, then I would reject it, and I just did it for 2 years, until finally I just basically came to pieces. Swamiji, in his inimitable fashion, he was trying to help me, but I was unhelpable. At some point, he just said, he used reverse psychology on me. He said, it's not working. He said, why don't you just give up? And then when he actually told me to give up, I said, no, I have something to say. But then he gave the biography to Davy, as if she wrote that wonderful book, Faith is My Armor, which freed me just to tell stories. Because I didn't have to do a biography anymore. So I wrote Swami Kriyananda as we've known him, which, by the way, I recently listened to the audiobook. It's real good. Because the stories are incredible. The things that people went through, they're wonderful. It's very entertaining. But I still had this one in front of me. because it's such a difficult thing to understand how a few individuals can just create so much magnetism that so many other people can have their lives be changed. There's no way the human mind can understand that. You just have to get in tune with it. This is why Swamiji tells us that when Master was in public, Master would talk about many different things, Kriya practice or this or energy or affirmation. When Master was with the disciples, he would talk about attunement. Because he could work through us if we were receptive to that. If we put ourselves if we tried to be in tune with his consciousness. The singers up here, it was so lovely, and the group that stood up here, and you all just started in together, and you were so in tune with each other. In tune with each other, in tune with the song, in tune with the melody. There was the sound, just like that. Music is so extraordinary, but it was an exercise in attunement. And of course, the reason you're in tune with each other is because you're listening, and because you want to be. Because you know if we're all in the same vibration, which is what the note is, we're all in the same vibration, then something happens. This is exactly what it is. This is what it is to be a disciple. This is what it is to be an instrument. Is that the masters are singing a certain note. And we need to have a voice. And we use our voices in many different ways. I just, let me just give me a second. I thought it was this afternoon. What was that? Oh, I know what it was. Traveling around is so interesting for me because there's so many people who are doing so many interesting things, many of them quite small, but all of them indicative of the fact that what Jesus and Babaji are doing is working, which is that the overall vibration of people's understanding is rising. And this is the most ridiculous example that I've encountered recently. We were in Ecuador, and our hostess, we were being hosted by these wonderful people, and I don't even remember the context, but they wanted to take us out to this particular little ice cream store where they had these homemade popsicles. And there was a particular popsicle that she really wanted us to have, and they were all made from fresh ingredients. And the popsicle was a detox popsicle made from kale. It occurred to them that they could make a detox popsicle made from kale, and that people would come from a long distance to get it. Of course, it was green, but really it was just a lot of sugar and a lot of good fruit juice. It was absolutely scrumptious. But I just thought to myself, we're really in a new age. You have all these choices in the ice cream store, and you buy the detox popsicle made from kale. Who would have thunk? But somebody did. And you can see all the different levels of change in perception and reality that would make such a thing happen. This is what I mean about being optimistic. So even in our own little tiny worlds, however, whatever it is that we're doing, we can either act just as a closed entity, or we can read that passage in autobiography and say, how can I help? And the way we help is by the vibrations that we put into this world. And just choose your cause. It doesn't really matter. It matters only how you do it. And whether you do it for yourself or whether you do it for God. And what I wrote in that book and the way I ended up with Swamiji, and after, a long time, finally we clicked. And I went into real seclusion up in Washington State, where Anand and Kirtani have this house, which is right by the Canadian border. When I first started staying up there, they live in Italy, so it's empty a lot. They didn't even have internet. It was marvelous. I was just totally there. And the closest neighbor is a mile or two away. It was just totally quiet, psychically as well as physically. And I could hear Swami talking to me, and I got the point. And so basically he told me what to write, and I wrote it. You know, once I got into it, it was easy because he was writing. He's a very good writer, you know, and he knew just what was needed. It's year by year by year, 45 chapters. That's why it's so fat. 45 years from the time that I arrived until he left the body. I thought it was going to go a little longer, but these things had their way. Boom, it was over. He died. That was it. But I wanted people to understand not merely about him, but much more important, how did he do it? And how did he do it? What were the principles? What was the energy that he put out? You know, how do you serve God and Guru? Because it doesn't, I mean, it's nice to know that he could, but the most important thing is how can I do it? How can I have what he has? You know, and few of us, well, let's be honest, none of us were going to come anywhere close to what he could do. He was one in a bazillion. But we can be the best version of what's given to us. You know, this is just who I am. And the good news is God loves us just the way we are. I mean, I think that sometimes, well, let me put it differently. It's a challenge at times, but it's really, really something to understand. And they're all just working for our freedom. And our freedom is in serving. So think about it. And what I wanted also to preserve in that book is, and because a great deal of that book is Swamiji's words, I've never been able to figure out what percentage, but it's a very high percentage, because I just wanted his voice to live on. You know, live on not just in all the, I mean, of course there's so many ways these days that you can reach it, but just like in this situation, and faced with this, going through all the difficulties that he had to go through, all the heartaches, all the disappointments, all the victories, like, how do you do it? As servant of Baba Came, Master and Jesus, how do we do it? How do we have fun doing it? And what does, once you decide that God realization is the goal, and that Kriya Yoga is the path, or any part of that, or that you just want to be an instrument of light no matter what you call it, you know, what do I do next? And how do I train myself always to say, well, sir, what would you like? You know? And it becomes, it's not easy, but it's simple. And we think because it's not easy, it must be complicated. But it isn't. It's just, what do you want me to do next, sir? And then help me to do it. Okay? I would like to invite, if there's any questions or something you would like me to address, maybe we can do that for a little bit before we consider the night done. Well, there you are, Adam. First question. The question was, are there any notable stories that didn't make it into the book? I'm of the age where I have everything on paper. So I have all these file cabinets that I've had. In 2003, when I thought I was going to write this book, I had, well, when Swami told me I was going to write about him, told me that I should, I always had a notebook and a pen with me whenever I was with him. And for a number of years, I carried a tape recorder even, but it became an inhibition, so I stopped doing that. I have this many transcripts from those recordings, and I have hundreds of notes that did not get anywhere near that book. And I was standing in front of them about 2 years ago, and I thought, oh my God, I can't die without finishing this because nobody else can deal with all this. So there's more that is not in the book than is in the book. Because the book had its own, it's so fun for me because when Swami was writing The Path, when he decided that he was going to write The Path, this was 1974, I believe, and that I worked for him sort of during the time he was writing The Path, not the new Path, which he edited later, but the first version of that, which was published in 1977, I believe. And it was the last book he wrote before he got a computer, so I was his manuscript typist. So I typed and retyped and typed and retyped that book. Then he got a computer and it was much easier for him, and not so nice for me. But when he decided to write that book, which he had also been commissioned by Yogananda to do it, and he had tried to write it a couple of times and it wasn't time. I worked as a secretary then. We had no telephones, no wired electricity, and I worked over in the downtown area in what is now Consul Temple, but I lived in the Ayodhya where Swami's house is. Most of you know what I'm talking about. And every afternoon at 4 o'clock, Deva and I, and sometimes Kalyani, would come over the hill with Swami's mail and the messages, because the only phone in the community was on the other side of the hill. And so one day when I came in and Swamiji was, he was much younger then. He was crouched on the floor. He had all these pieces of paper spread out in some kind of a sort of pattern on the floor. And I walked in and I'm standing over him, he's kind of crouched like this, and he just looks up and kind of like a deer in the headlights. How am I ever going to make a book out of this? How am I ever going to pull all this together? And then he worked on it for 2 years, and he did. But I was with him through that whole cycle, and he often, again, you see, was helping me. He talked to me about basically a book has its own destiny. You don't really create it, you just find it in the ether. Swami himself said that he is trying to teach us a new kind of creativity, which is where it doesn't come out of our ideas, but rather it exists, so to speak, in the causal, and we tune into it and we bring it into manifestation. Which I'm sure many of you, when you do creative work, you know that's just what it feels like. It's like it's there and you're trying to feel the template and put it forward. That's what this book was. So it just told me exactly where it was supposed to go. And it was really obvious what belonged and what didn't. But there are just so many random anecdotes and just random moments. I've started working on that book, but it's not time yet. I mean, I have to go into seclusion again and just really settle myself. But like I have a little vignette. I worked on it for 2 months, 1 month a year for 2 years. And I have like this whole section about all these different encounters that I had with Swamiji in terms of beggars asking him for money. Just like in the different way he would respond and his comments about people's karma. We were somewhere it doesn't matter where, but as it happened, I think we were in Germany, and we're in some mall, and some young man walks up and asks Swami for money. Swami pulls out his wallet and says, the man spoke English, opens his wallet and he said, I'm going to give you money, but not very much, he said. This is not good for you. It's not good for you to be begging like this. You're a strong-armed man. You should be working. So here's he gave him like $2 or whatever it was, like that, sort of admonished him. Did the man change? I have no idea. We saw another man who was about as pathetic as you could see. He was on something that was like a skateboard, and I think his legs didn't work. He had a tennis shoe on one hand, and he propelled himself. We weren't in India. I think we were in Europe somewhere. But this man is like this. I mean, just like, it's terrifying to see someone like that. And we sort of walked by him, and Swami looked at him. And elsewhere, I wrote in the book, Swami said, just a glance, he said, I look in someone's eyes, I can see the whole story. He looked at the man, and he just walked by. Later, he said to us, that poor man, he said, he's so, his selfishness brought him to that position, and he's still going down. He hasn't yet turned around. And Swami just walked by, and he didn't think it would help him to give him anything. He just walked by. And then in Rome, there was an old woman who begged outside the hotel, and every time Swami went in or out, he gave her money. And then one day she wasn't there. Swami became very alarmed. He starts asking the hotel staff, the woman who begs here every day, where is she? And they assured him that he had several locations and this just wasn't her day. And when she came back, Swami was so glad to see her and gave her money again. You know, just like, so interesting. The last one in that same series was, we saw the documentary about Mother Teresa of Calcutta. There was a documentary. And I went to see that with Swami with a group. And afterwards he says, you know, the people she's picking up off the street and helping, he said, naturally it's wonderful that she's doing that. He said, but you look into the eyes of those people, you can see why they ended up that way. You know, just sympathy, but he was never, he wasn't sentimental. That's what I would say about Swami too. He was very clear-minded, he was very compassionate, but he wasn't sentimental. His view was always not just, he didn't panic at the suffering of others. That's the word I want to use. You know, many of us panic when we see others suffering and we desperately want it to stop. But think about it. You know, if through that suffering, a person will learn, or this person will learn what they need to know to become blissful and free, would you want them not to have the opportunity to learn it? So, you know, it's a very, very challenging teaching, extremely challenging. And that doesn't mean you're not compassionate and you'll do what you can, but that's different than feeling like this has to stop. Because if it stops, how will people grow? And then you ask the question, if Divine Mother could take us to freedom through an easier route, wouldn't she do that? Why would she take us through a difficulty if there was an easier way for us to go? That's why there's so few of us on the path of self-realization. I mean that seriously. Because if you really open yourself to understand what this path is, it is very, very, very challenging. And there's no place to hide. But take it a step at a time. Don't throw yourself off the cliff. Just, you know, go and inch as you can. Take what you can, work with what you can work with, and then it'll lead you to the next step. I mean, those are some stories. Either when I run out of money and can't afford to travel anymore, which can happen, or the world becomes too dangerous and I can't travel, then I'll get to that book. Or when Divine Mother says, now, and I'll do it. Yeah. But it's several years of work, I think. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions? Yes. I think that's when Mary materializes in the wheat field, wherever it is. After I met Swami Kriyananda, and I knew he was a disciple of Yogananda, and I knew that who he was had to be the result of his relationship with his guru, I felt that it was incumbent upon me to go back to that book. And as soon as I opened it, I loved it. And it was even weirder than that. It was like, why didn't I like this book before? This is such a great book, you know? But atonement is everything. And there's just this mystery of the way these things open. Because I was so, he transferred consciousness to me, is the only thing I can say. I mean, even though that was such a terrible night and he didn't even notice me in the room, apparently, still I became receptive to him at that moment, and therefore everything that was true for him started becoming true for me. Okay? Yeah. Yes. Either one of you. Uh-huh.
How was your family respond?
Oh, my dear family. Well, thank you again. Thanks for reminding me. How did my family respond, my parents? When I left, I met Swami when I was 22, and just before I turned 24, I moved there. but it was not 2 years, just the way the timing worked. And when I was in Bangalore for the first time, with, with Indian folks, we were having a satsang, and it was the first time I was in Bangalore many years ago, and I was with an Ananda group, and they were asking me my story, and when I said, and then I just sold everything and just got in my car, and I went up to Ananda village, and I never looked back, and these wonderful Indian people said, "And what did your parents think?" And I said, "I never asked them." And then I had to say, "You have to understand I'm American." I mean, we operate a little different. But the fact of the matter is, and it's twofold. One was, it never occurred to me to ask them. It just didn't. I think what they thought was not a relevant question for me. I just was too determined in my own destiny. That's my particular karma. The second part of it was, let me just think for a second. Oh yes, I was raised in a Jewish family, and there's many characteristics about Jewish people, and one of them is I don't know if it's still true, but at a certain point, Ananda, the founding generation of Ananda, was 10% Jewish, which is a very high percentage compared to the nation. But Jews are always in the forefront of revolutions. And I just look through history. It's partly because, to a certain extent, we're marginalized, or we have less to lose. We don't live in the mainstream. We have all this. I always expected to. Well, this is separate. I'll say it in a moment. But and Jews are also trained to think for themselves. I mean, in your family. So in my family, I was always trained to think for myself. And my parents respected my right to think for myself. And so when I had the opportunity to make an unusual choice, I just made it. And my parents at first thought it was cute and that it wouldn't last. So they were nicely supportive because they thought this was just a phase that was just going to end. And then it kind of went on and on and on and on. And and sometime when I was in my early 30s, for some reason, I know what happened. There's several things that happened, but for some reason they decided suddenly to not be supportive. They wanted to be against my being part of Ananda. They just started this little thing. And I was with my father, and I said, "I'm original, and I think for myself. I would expect you to be proud of me." And he knew that I'd kind of captured him. That's the issue. Okay? Okay. Okay. So I said to my father, I thought you would be proud of me. And logic works really well in Jewish families. So I caught him logically, and then I said, "Don't do this, because if you ask me to choose, I won't choose you." And that was the end of it. And they were wonderful after that. And then there were two more parts that were fun. At some point, Swami wrote the oratorio, which would have been around 85, 86, and my parents would get some mailings from Ananda. They kind of kept in touch. And so somehow, when the oratorio was written, my parents decided that I'd become Christian. And you can do anything when you're Jewish except become Christian. That's why there's so many Jews in Buddhism, because it doesn't have that problem. So they decided that I'd become Christian, and they started telling me that I had just become Christian. And I tried to explain to them that Jesus had always been there, they just had never noticed. We kind of had this absurd conversation, really like this. And then this was the wonderful moment. My mother starts in, because we were cultural Jews, but not religious. So my mother starts going like this: "If only we had raised you in Judaism, then maybe this wouldn't have happened." And so I start trying to reassure her, "No, Mom, it's nothing that you did. It's really just like, if only we had done this." And then this little voice inside of me says, "Let her take the blame." And so I started saying, "Yes, Mother, if only." We did that for a little while, and that was the end of it. And then at the very end of her life, My father was always, well, and they were the same, but at the very end of her life, my mother said, I had to help them a lot at the end. She said, kind of like this, I don't know, somehow, I just like having you around. And then she kind of gazed over here and said, maybe it's because of what you're doing. And that was I thought that's enough. I don't need more than that. But I was not dependent on that. Very important. Okay. I asked Swamiji, I said, is there something like that? And he said, have they ever tried to stop you? I said, no, sir, never. He said, then you owe them respect and loyalty. If they asked you to choose, that would be different. But they never did. Did you have a question? Yes, he sure did. That haven't gotten legs is the word you use. I think that we have barely begun art as a hidden message. I mean, I'm good friends with Dana Anderson, who was up here for a long time, and she has all these global plans, which I'm trying to help her with. I even haven't touched it. You know, we have more people are beginning to write. Very few people, almost no one is writing music. Swami himself, at the end of his life, he lamented that people weren't writing music. But he admits that, you know, he set the bar pretty high, so it's a little tricky for people writing music. But and we hardly ever dance. We don't have any theater, really, to speak of. I mean, we just have barely touched it. And when you read Art as a Hidden Message, which I've been rereading it lately, I mean, the creative arts, he explains, and it's true, historically, has done more to transform society than philosophy. Because it touches the heart, it moves people. Swami actually asked me to write a spiritual novel, one of the many unfinished assignments, because he said society's been changed more often by a novel than anything else. Think of Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's one of the reasons we don't have slavery anymore. And so I think that we barely touched it. Education for life, how many schools do we have in the whole world? Marriage is still chaotic, you know? Just educate the way people are being educated. We've hardly done anything. That's what I mean. Nobody cares yet. So each of us picks up our tiny little piece. You know, just whatever little piece we can deal with. You know, just to do watercolors in the evening, or write poetry, or help children learn to read. You know, just any piece of it that looks good to you. We just all together keep adding to it. I've been thinking a lot about art, particularly. But really, if you think about it, it's all of it. Look at society. Mamma mia, you know. But we're the future. And the future takes a little time. There was a time, Ananda Village, we had a great deal of disharmony with our neighbors in the early years. Our neighbors had all moved out there to drop out of society in a real way, and at that time marijuana was illegal, and most of them were supporting themselves by growing marijuana illegally, which is not something where you want a whole lot of visitors. And famously down the road from Swami's house, you come to a sign that says, no trespassing without an invite or a warrant. It says on the gate, right? I mean, this was years ago. And so then we move out there, and we advertise to the whole world, and we invite everybody to come, and we want, you know, the reporters and the television people to come. So we were a little bit in conflict with our neighbors. And it focused in on the mailbox, which was on the main street. The neighbors, we would put up a mailbox, and the neighbors would knock it down. It sort of went on for a number of years. And then Camp White Dima, who was the man who recently passed away, he was a big man, and he took this as a challenge, and he finally, he sank a concrete pillar like 4 feet into the ground, and then he made a metal box, and he welded it onto that, and all this, and so we had this thing there that would wreck your truck if you tried to knock it down. That one held for a while, and then somebody came and managed to pry the metal box off of the cement pedestal. And so then it was, and then for years after that, somebody would meet the mailman, and he would just set the mail right on the pedestal and we'd take it. So I came back to Swami's house one afternoon and reported, how it was going, and then when I said they'd managed to take the top off, he commended them on their determination and their industriousness. These people are really committed, and that was something to admire. And we laughed about it and just let it go. And then his dome at that time, I don't know about again. His dome at that time was just one. His whole house was just the dome, and there were these partitions, like 8-foot partitions. So he walked around into the office that was partitioned off. I'm in the kitchen making supper or something. And then he calls to me from the office, and it rings through the dome in his voice. He says, "Asha?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You see, we're trying to transform all of society, and naturally, it's going to take a little time." And that's always just been in the back of my mind. Yeah, this is a big job, but fun. We were born for this. Okay. All right. I think that might be the whole story for tonight. Thank you very much for your kind attention. God bless you.
Am I up? Okay. Here? Just wanted. Thank you for coming, sir. And thank you, Asha, of course. And I want to let you know tomorrow she has a workshop from 9:30 to 12:30. Self-realization, the fearless heart. We will be right here. If you haven't signed up yet, you certainly can do that tonight. She'll also be talking at Sunday service on Sunday. Our service starts at 9:30, and then the Festival of Light service starts at 10 o'clock, and we'll all be back here. And there's a special event tomorrow night at the community, not here, at our Ananda community. We call it Guru Night. It's our annual celebration. We create shrines around the community to each of these masters, and we take a little mini pilgrimage around each of the shrines, have a little meditation, chanting. It's a beautiful evening. We start at 6 o'clock. It ends at dark when we're at Yogananda's shrine, and it's a beautiful devotional time together, and of course, all are welcome to come if you want to join us in that. It's a very full and fun weekend. So again, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for those of you who tuned in online. And Asha will be around for just a little bit tonight, but then if you want more Asha, come back tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you.